What's up, Willowbrook? Today we're in Genesis chapter 28. And this chapter is really important and pivotal in the life of Jacob because I'm sure growing up he probably heard stories from his grandfather Abraham about Abraham's God. Or maybe he heard stories from his dad Isaac about Isaac's God. But in this chapter, we see God not just as the God of Abraham or the God of Isaac, but now also the God of Jacob. And maybe some of us have experienced something similar to this. I know I have in my own life. I grew up in church. My dad was a pastor for a while when I was a kid. My mom served every week at the church. And though I knew about God, God still seemed like he was the God of my parents. And that all changed one day when I was in high school, when God's Spirit began to draw me to him, and I made the decision to follow him. And suddenly, he was no longer just the God of my mom or my dad, but he was my God. And we see this today in this chapter. We read that Jacob is on a journey. He's not on a journey, though, to find God. He's actually fleeing for his life to get away from his brother Esau. And he's also on a mission. He's on a mission to find a wife 500 miles away from where he lives. But God pursued Jacob. And when Jacob was asleep one night, God found Jacob and he made himself known to Jacob. He promised to bless him, just like he promised to bless Abraham and Isaac before him. And then he told Jacob that he would be with him. When I read this passage, I'm reminded of two things: God's presence and God's promises. And how when you find the presence of God, you often find the promises of God along with it. It seems like you can't separate the two. You have God's presence and you have God's promises. Now, if you notice, Jacob's journey didn't change here. He was still fleeing for his life. He was still on a mission to find a bride. But what did change is important for him and for us today. It's the presence and the promises of God. See, God never promised that we wouldn't go through difficult times. But God did promise that he would be with us through those difficult times. So if you're watching this right now and maybe you feel like Jacob, maybe you're fearful for your life, maybe you don't know what's happening and you feel alone, let me remind you and encourage you that if you are a follower of Jesus, God's presence is with you and God's promises are for you. I hope that encourages you today, God's presence and God's promises. And I pray that you know God more today and every day. God bless you.